Hey there. So there's another form of content for this channel. I thought I would create, as an experiment, videos for sketching out ideas that I'm really passionate about, and I thought some of you might be interested in, and maybe we could start engaging in conversation, getting some feedback on these ideas, which could then help refine them into articles, project proposals, and whatnot. My professional career for the last 10 plus years has been dedicated to trying to help build communities for undervalued, forward-looking topics, forward-looking areas like artificial intelligence, the safety thereof, singularity, regenerative medicine, tissue engineering, exponential thinking and change, and these kinds of more forward-looking, longer-range issues that tend to be undervalued by societies. So kind of emerging science and technology as the overarching theme. And in that regard, I've really been thinking a lot recently about asteroid impacts. A few years ago, we had that scare in Russia. A lot of people were injured. Thankfully, no one was killed. But it put the issue of asteroid impacts on the map in a big way. Unfortunately, a lot of that interest has died down, but it has helped lead to what is now called Asteroid Day. It's a day that's getting a lot more interest, that's serving as a collective attractor of focus for the importance of building a planetary defense. We know that there are hundreds of thousands of asteroids in our solar system that we can't track right now with our present telescopes. So the US Congress in particular has called on NASA to do something very significant about this, but as is often the case with Congress, they say go do something about it, but they don't give you any funding to actually do much of anything. That's the situation that NASA's been in. There's this amazing charitable organization called the B612 Foundation that's really helping to raise a lot of interest, and in particular has fleshed out a very detailed engineering project for actually building and launching a Sentinel, what they call the Sentinel telescope, launch it, have it orbit the sun, that would be able to detect all those asteroids that could be on a collision course for us, could kill hundreds of thousands, millions of people, so that we have the early warning detection capacity to actually change their course, to do something about it. This is one of the most profound public goods, shared global public goods that we could create, but yet hardly nobody's funding it. They've estimated that the cost is about $430 million, as best as I can remember. They've only been able to raise so far $10 to $12 million or so by last count. And that's quite significant, but nowhere close to what they need. Yet $430 million is really not much. Think about the world economy. There's trillions and trillions of dollars. Think about a wing of a new museum, or a new wing for a museum, or a new wing for a research hospital. These things cost comparable amounts. There is a huge number of things that $400, $500 plus million is spent on that is not even remotely as important as building a planetary defense system for civilization. So the question is, how the hell would you go about raising $430 million? How the hell should B612 Foundation do it? The topic that I wanted to focus on with this video is kind of two-part, around this basic notion of collective attraction, and then secondly around crowdfunding, a concept that has actually been around for centuries. It just wasn't called crowdfunding back in the 17th century, when, for example, Beethoven and Mozart would require that in order to move forward with a new composition, they had to get X number of subscriptions sold to move forward with the actual printing of new composition, or Y number of seats sold for doing a concert, to play their music. So these threshold pledge systems have been around for a very long time. They're also called assurance contracts. This was a phrase, I think, developed around 1989, and there's some people that are doing some work around this notion. And they come in different shapes and sizes. Groupon's business model was basically a threshold pledge system, the original business model, threshold pledge system. Matching challenge campaigns, like one-to-one, you get someone who says, I will pledge $100,000 to your organization, but you have to get it matched dollar for dollar. If you only match 50,000 of it, that means you only get a total of 100,000, 50,000 from me, and then 50,000 from those who match my money. If you get all of it matched, you get $200,000. That is rampant. It's been rampant for a long time in the charitable world. And then, of course, Kickstarter, Indiegogo, and so on and so forth. These are threshold pledge systems for the most part. All right. What we haven't yet seen, though, is this kind of threshold pledge system operating on a global, really massive scale, really large scale. One of the best examples that I've seen is Phil Knight, the founder or co-founder of Nike, and his wife, whose name I'm sorry I'm forgetting, they launched a $500 million matching challenge campaign to take to a whole new level their medical research institute at a university in the U.S. They thought it was going to take, I think they were thinking like maybe 3 years to get it funded. It got funded in like half that time. I think it only took about 18 months or so for this thing to get funded. I mean, it attracted an incredible amount of interest. Really powerful collective attractor, which is controversial. A lot of people had a problem with that because it did suck up a lot of energy. It suck up a lot of oxygen. Kind of that notion of big trees in the forest suck up a lot of oxygen. Okay, so if you have the goal of raising $430 million, how are you going to do it? I've been thinking about, again, this isn't that original of an idea. Some of the things are maybe a little unique, but this idea of if-then.org. If-then.org campaigns that are dedicated to focusing on a global public good that we can actually together do something about. Not like climate change is not a fantastic example for this because there are so many variables involved with climate change. Climate change also has a tremendous amount of focus right now. So I think these things also work really well when they are very clearly being undervalued by society as things stand currently. So, I had to think about what are some of the other examples of what would be on this list, but definitely I think asteroid impacts, the need for building planetary defense is perfect example for this. Okay, so if-then.org would be a campaign dedicated toward the goal of, let's say, funding the Sentinel telescope together with a lot of folks. Imagine that it works with a 90%, 10% model. That is, if, and it's a huge if, you were able to get 90% of that, let's just call it 400 million to round it off, 400 million for the Sentinel telescope, full project, able to get 90% of that from a coalition of billionaires, 1300 or so billionaires in the world, foundations, corporations, those with a lot of money, to get them to just pledge it. And then that would only become available in tiers when certain milestones are triggered. So that's that 10% piece, and of course the big part of that would be public funding. So imagine that it is 400 million total that you're trying to raise, and you've got 3 stages to do that. And at each stage, once you hit that public funding milestone, it then triggers the private pledges, the 90% or 80% or whatever that is. And then you do that in 3 stages so that you can scale up and you can show proof of concept like a startup. It's kind of like seed round, Series A round, etc. in the way that funding often works in Silicon Valley and elsewhere for venture startups. So that's not an original idea. The thing, though, that we haven't seen yet is bringing together a lot of different variables around a singular campaign that could have different elements, like not just this pledge triggering mechanism for funding, for financing, but also for other milestones, other variables that would have to be achieved in order to trigger that private side financing. Okay, so let me give an example of that. If you think about a campaign that was controversial back in, I think, 2012, Kony 2012. This was a campaign launched by Invisible Children, an organization that was dedicated to raising awareness about what was going on in the Congo with regard to children and other families and so on being killed by this warlord Joseph Kony and his cohorts. They wanted to make Joseph Kony the most famous war criminal on the face of the earth. And all else equal, they did that with the Kony 2012 campaign. There's a lot of controversy around it. I won't go into it. But that was a profoundly effective collective attractor in many ways. They did a number of smart things, like tweeting, rallying the base of primarily millennials around tweeting a hit list of policymakers and celebrities like Oprah Winfrey and others, asking them to retweet about this 30-minute documentary video that they made that got, at the time, the most views on YouTube. But again, another example of a powerful collective attractor. There have been a number of examples like this, in terms of these collective attractors. Think about the ice bucket challenge, which was not deliberately engineered but it had profound influence. If Charity Water is another amazing organization with the September campaigns that they do every year. So you could go through dozens of these kinds of examples of these collective attractors. Imagine if we had that dedicated toward building a planetary defense, and some of the other variables, milestones that you would have to achieve would be, for example, in order to trigger the private side financing, that 90%, most of the financing from those billionaires, corporations, etc. Let's say you have to get, X number of likes on a Facebook page, which might not seem that important, but part of the goal that you could engineer into this if-then campaign is requiring that you have to build massive global focus, attention, awareness around a particular issue. Think about the original moonshot, the Apollo program, putting men, women on the moon, returning them safely to Earth within a decade. That had an enormous impact on the United States and the rest of the world. One of the major impacts was the inspiration that so many people in the United States and elsewhere felt because of that moonshot. Just by knowing about it, the awareness of it, it influenced science fiction, it influenced aspirations. I mean, so many different things. You could do an entire video dedicated to that. So there is, enormous value in just building huge awareness around a particular issue, getting a lot of focus on it, because of the ancillary offshoots, the unknown, sort of known unknown benefits that could come about from that awareness, the add-on attraction that could take place from that awareness. This is similar to a guy by the name of Peter Diamandis' concept of the line of supercredibility. So real quickly, Bill and Melinda Gates go out and say, we're going to put people on Mars within 5 years. New York Times will probably run a front-page article about that. If I go out and do that, not a chance in hell, nobody's going to give a shit. If Bill and Melinda Gates and a whole coalition of the world's most wealthy people, Larry and Sergey at Google and so on and so forth, come together and say, we're going to put people on the moon, on Mars within 5 years, a lot of people actually think that that's got a real legitimate shot at happening. So I'm below the line of credibility, Bill and Melinda Gates is above the line of credibility, and that entire coalition of Bill and Melinda Gates type folks are above the line of super credibility. That's sort of that line where people are more likely just to accept subconsciously that you are legitimate without having to think a lot about it. In that regard, that we have seen, and this is related to Malcolm Gladwell and others' notion of the tipping point, but you see scaling attraction when you reach certain thresholds. So I've seen this play out in numerous examples over the years. A recent example that was close to me that I was really grateful for was around this complex subject of artificial intelligence safety, not artificial intelligence in the Terminator type way, but anyway, I won't even get into it. That is an issue that many people, including myself, spend a lot of time trying to raise awareness for, and in recent last 3 years or so, it has gone through incredible successive stages of tipping points that now you have Elon Musk that's committed $10 million toward the study of the near-term and long-term implications of artificial intelligence and generally around safety issues. There have been other areas like this where you've seen these sort of series of tipping points that have hit. So by engineering a campaign that requires you to hit different milestones and variables in order to trigger the primarily funding to do the core, pursue the core goal or project, as it were, that you're dedicated to pursuing in the first place, that dramatically elevates the collective attraction for that project, dramatically elevates the likelihood of offshoot effects happening from it. I kind of feel like I'm rambling with this right now, but so there's a lot of different elements to this, but that's the basic idea. An ifthen.org campaign that would be a singular artifact. I mean, I'm simply imagining this as a website. And again, a lot of this is not original. I think some of the elements, the devil's in the details with these things. It's a website that beautifully formatted, works on all kinds of devices, that has a number of different elements come together, but the simple message is, if X, then Y, dedicated toward global public good. And primarily it's oriented around getting the 80-90% of what is needed for Y to happen pledged from the private, stakeholders, foundations, corporations, individual philanthropists, whomever, that are then triggered when you get the public pledges, public commitments, public funding rolling in, and that you're not just limiting it to funding, you're doing it for other variables as well. I think there could be profound power in this. It's especially important to do it as a concentrated campaign. Coney 2012 is a great example. Charity Water's September campaigns are a phenomenal example. They spend a huge amount of time each year preparing for their September campaign. They bring together so many different partners, so many different content elements. Clinton Global Initiative is another pretty example of, I'm trying to think of different examples of this, but where basically, it's a dedicated effort with many different pieces being brought together. In the case of something like this, it could be a core video, it could be a series of content partners, it could be celebrities. Neil deGrasse Tyson is someone who really, really cares and understands this issue, where he gets on board with being a dedicated content partner to this. All of these different pieces being brought together in an orchestrated manner. Maybe it's tied into Asteroid Day each year. Maybe it's done in stages so that you can have a proof of concept. You're not trying to bite off everything at once. You can then get some funding in the door to invest in that campaign, to do more, to scale up. Maybe it's in stages in terms of 10%, 50%, and then 100%. So it's a three-year campaign, like a capital campaign, for funding a new wing of a university or of a hospital. That's the basic idea, ifthen.org. Let me know what you think. I'm basically just trying to use these videos as a way of refining pitches, and God, this one was probably horrible as the first one, but thanks for indulging me. I hope you found it interesting. See you later.